Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on leadership in action. In particular, we are going to look at leadership and how we hold our leaders accountable as citizens. We're also going to look at leadership regarding mentorship to young leaders. Joining the show, we have experts in this field, and I'm pleased to welcome our first guest to the show. His name is Tito Rutaremara. Many of you know him, and he's here in his capacity as the chair of the Elders Advisory Forum for Rwanda. Thank you very much, Mr. Rutaremara.
Thank you.
We're also joined here by Mireille Ineza Karera, who is the CEO of Cora Coaching and Business Academy. Mireille, thank you for joining The Square.
Thank you for having me.
Great. My name is Diana Mpisi, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by my resident panelists. Berna Namata is a resident panelist of the show. Great to have you, Berna.
Thank you, Diana.
As always. And we're also joined by resident panelist Charles Haber. Great to have you on the show.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good. Great. As we always do, before we kick off, we would like to just pick up a couple of things that have caught our attention during the week thus far, midweek highlights. Berna, is there something you'd like to share?
Yes. Bashir being referred to the ICC by his country.
His own people.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we Africans don't do ourselves any favors. For a very long time, we have argued that, the ICC exists to persecute Africans. So when you see a country in Africa in the process of transition, doing that, for me, I think is a problem.
And the irony is that this is something that he managed, until he was ousted, to avoid for years, and it's his people who are pushing for him to be.
I mean, you will argue around the accountability, for the atrocities, but for Christ's sake, it's the 21st century, and Africans, we are still looking outside for solutions. I think,
I agree.
It's quite disturbing.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Charles, any midweek highlights before we kick off the show?
I'm extremely concerned by, not really, more than concerned, really troubled. Luckily this week we've not had rains, terrible rains and floods. Rwanda has been flooding. We talked about this in the last show. But we're faced with the threat of the coronavirus. We're faced with the threat of locusts.
You think the locusts will cross over to Rwanda? It's just a matter of time.
Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, they know no boundaries. Even if Trump built his wall in Katuna, they'll still fly over. So I think it's not unique to Rwanda. If you're a believer in the Bible, we need to ask ourselves, what have we done wrong?
So you're worried about the weather conditions and all these things happening?
Climate change is real. The only person who doesn't know about it is Donald Trump.
Food security.
But it's real.
Yeah, the threats are...
They're real.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining the show, Mr. Tito Rutaremara and Mireille. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Mireille.
Perfect.
Yes. We are here because really this conversation, as you know, it was sparked by events that happened last week but one, and amongst ourselves and our production team, we thought, let's have something on leadership. Let's have a show on leadership based on the events whereby, just recently the state minister in charge of Constitution and Legal Affairs resigned following claims that he assaulted a private security guard while trying to enter a private building in Kigali. And we thought that we should have a conversation in terms of leadership and what we hold our leaders accountable to. And my first question is to you, Mzee Tito, in terms of someone who's been instrumental in contributing to Rwanda's leadership frameworks, whether it's the RPF manifesto, whether it's the constitution that you played a key role in forming, even your time as a senator, as a member of parliament. But you're here today to talk to us, to talk to our viewers in terms of in your capacity as the chair of the Rwanda Elders Advisory Forum. What are some of the basic tenets, some of the basic the basic aspects of leadership that we think our leaders should have? If we can kick up the conversation by that.
Well, they should be having so many things.
I know we don't have time for everything, but just the basic ones.
The first thing, they should have the capacity.
Yes.
The capacity of choosing and of leading others. Because if you want to lead others, you have to at least to have that capacity.
Yes.
If you are poor in your head, you can't lead them. Because you have to lead them to do something. Then that's one. Second, you have to have other qualities of leadership. The other qualities is you are capable of talking to people, of organizing people, of telling them what to do. And in fact, for great leaders, they get what they call an idea. That idea, I mean, I give an example. In Rwanda, from our parents, the great parents, they're always saying the land of milk and honey. It means it has an idea that all Rwandans had, that Rwanda should be a prosperous country where all people are free to come and live. That was an idea. Now, a good leader is the one who will get that idea and brings it to a form of vision. Either start by a dream, as when you were in 1999, 1998, when the Lugwiro meetings which were there, people had a dream of having a country that is prosperous. We are coming from a genocide.
Yes.
And it's why, in fact, where you got the Vision 2020.
Yes.
But a good leader is the one who will bring that dream to a vision, from a vision to strategies and the projects and the politics and so on in order to have it. And you had it. That is a great leader. Of course, a great leader has to get even other qualities, let's say, a quality of, there is what they call emotional maturity.
Yes.
Emotional maturity is something, but to know how to use your emotions. If it is to be serious, you are serious. If you have to quarrel a bit in order to make people understand, you have to do it. But there are some areas where you have to control your emotions.
Absolutely.
But I give an example. For instance, when you are coming from the struggle and you find that all people have been massacred. You have got your parents, your other people. And, there is really always a tendency of thinking, these people should be punished. And you say, no, please. Because you have to be the unit of the country. That you think there you are emotionally mature.
Absolutely.
It is different from, let's say, there are other leaders. If we take Hitler, for instance, for him, when he saw, because he didn't like Jews, he went on massacring them.
Yes.
Because you see, he was a leader, but not emotionally mature. That's it. There are so many qualities: be humble, be capable of inspiring, giving your ideas, and especially we have got a leader here who's a good organizer. You know how to organize and so on, and you go on following. You know that people can be accountable, as you have been asking, and so on. Following, monitoring, control, and accountability, and everything. So many qualities. There are so many qualities in it.
But one thing I picked up from Mzee Rutaremara here is to do with servant leadership, right? I feel this is something that, starting with the president, I think this is something that he embodies, and we see, it was to serve people. You're a leader, but it's through servant leadership. And before I open the panel to the resident panelists, Charles and Charles and Berna, what do you have to say with regards to that? Your expectations. What are some, aspects of leadership our leaders should act on, make sure it's part of them? And you are saying this, answering this question in your capacity as a leadership coach, as someone who's been doing this in the business for a while in Rwanda. What's and the context we gave also regarding the events that happened last week, but one.
Yes, I certainly agree with Mzee Tito that leadership is such a broad term. We can spend hours and hours discussing that. And in fact, leadership scholars have been debating around that very same topic for centuries and centuries. So there are so many books out there, many papers and research articles around leadership. But in light of what happened in the news last week, and also looking at the context of Rwanda and locally, so I can imagine that what we heard, the allegations, the claims, may give two aspects of behaviors to the public. The first one will be the public being disappointed to hear that someone we look up to in such a leadership position would do such a thing. Whether it is right or wrong, or we know that it's 100% confirmed or not, so the public will be disappointed. But the second thing, as a leadership coach now, I would say is that we, all of us on this panel and also the public, should use this opportunity to not point the finger at the leaders in the public service or even in the private sector, but really what happens is that the temptation is for us to do this, but we should be now doing the second thing, which is to point the finger towards us and take this opportunity to say, if it was me in that situation, what would I have done? So that could be uncomfortable. So if I can ask you, maybe all of you, to do this in front, so that is easier. But if I point the finger at me and really assessing what would I have done if I was under that pressure, and that goes in line with the emotional intelligence element of a leader, which requires for a leader to know how to regulate emotions, to know what are my triggers if I am under stress. Do I tend to rush into decisions or not? So I would say, as a leader, particularly in light of that issue, we should certainly take time to work on our leadership, emotional intelligence, and how it affects everything around. That means my position as a leader, the organization that I represent, the reputation, and ultimately the nation that I serve, coming back to being a servant leader. So the key thing when it comes to leadership and executive coaching is first know yourself as a leader. What is my tendency? What are my traits? What are my triggers, my traits? What could get me to blow up in a second? So there's a lot more, obviously, I can say, but I will not monopolize.
Yes. Charles Penner, the floor is open to you. What, the question is, what are some crucial elements of leadership that you think, as a Rwandan, our leaders should have?
Bana looks at me. I know
I think Bena's she looks like she's about to say something.
Tito said something that sort of, and Diana, with your permission, I want to go away from what the events of last week, because the events of last week are just a trigger of preparedness of leadership, and it's not the worst scandal that Rwanda has seen. It probably will never even be the worst.
I think it's just the latest.
Yeah, it's just the latest,
Yes.
And this is a current affairs program, and it's just natural that we talk about such things. But one of the things that really comes into my mind, and I think Mzee Tito is best placed, thank you, Diana, for having brought him on the show, is how we prepare our leaders to come into positions of leadership, especially in public service. Mireille says something extremely important, that how public servants are in the eyes of scrutiny. You know, where we sit, and Mireille, forgive me, it's very difficult for me to point a finger at myself. because I don't serve myself. Yeah, I run a business, so I'm accountable to the people that I lead in the business. I have a family, so I'm accountable to my family members. Right. So it's I'm not saying it's not the right thing, and probably you've earned yourself another client in Cora.
I like that.
But the point is, and I'll be extremely interested to learn from Mzee Tito, how do we prepare our people for leadership? And related to this, we have seen especially young people fall miserably. Today, he's shining in school, or she, rises up through the ranks extremely quickly, is appointed because they're a good technician, they're in a position of responsibility, but they don't know how to handle themselves. Maybe they're extremely good socially and spend hours in parties and church and all these other social obligations, and then they forget that all of a sudden they're public figures. Maybe for purposes of political balance, they belong to that other party, and we bring them on board because the Constitution dictates so. Maybe they are from specialist groups, women, diaspora, you know, all these other things, physically challenged, all these other balances that we have to make as a country, and that is in line with our competition. I mean, with our Constitution. But how prepared are some of these people for positions of leadership? And I think that's actually where the crux of the matter is. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. But Charles, I think you also jumped the gun a bit. Definitely, it's good that you brought it up, but that was definitely something we are going to focus on in this conversation. How do we prepare, like Charles said, leaders for positions? But before we go to that, I wanted us to just finalize and finish in terms of expectations and leadership. And I think, Brenna, you're going to say something.
Yeah, and
before you disagree, Charles, but I know you had a prior thought.
We always disagree. So.
You had a prior.
It's a debate.
Your expectations of leaders and leadership in this country.
I just feel that the beginning point shouldn't be distinguishing between a human being and a leader. Yeah, as human beings, we need to agree on fundamental values, you know, and as a society, we need to evaluate and agree on what the values are. So whether you're in a position of leadership or not, this is what standard practice should be. So if you're dealing with a human, it's a human being, you know. So, and if we have a common understanding of these values, then it doesn't matter whether you're in position of power or not, you know. It shouldn't wait till you're being watched. I mean, we all know that you are who you are when nobody's watching, you know. So can we cultivate the values? We have had discussions on this forum around family values, for instance, you know, the need to have children grow up around a proper setting, because that is really what sets who you become in future, you know, your value system. It eventually, you know, as you grow up, shapes, you know, the decisions you make. And if you're lucky to be given power, that still, you know, plays out, you know. So for me, I feel that the focus has to be on really building common values. And
being, first and foremost, seeing each other like we're all human beings.
Yes, we're all human beings.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be about how you treat someone, shouldn't be about which office or, no, it's a human being. Secondly, I think, again, in link with the value system, it has to be about your responsibility as a human being or as a citizen. There are certain responsibilities that you should have, which in the end should define who you are. For instance, paying your taxes. If you're paying your taxes, or if there's a ticket that you have to pay parking, you pay, because it is a responsibility, it is a duty.
But it has to be educated. For some people, it might be natural, and some people, it might be nurtured. So I think that's where I started off saying that leadership is such a broad topic where it inspired thousands of books. So I certainly agree with you on the value systems. There are some homes and families where that is natural. You talked about the Bible. So Christians will have certain value systems, but it doesn't mean that every Rwandan, every African will have that. So in terms of organizational leadership, I think organizations hiring leaders should put a place or a space there for leaders to undergo that journey you're referring to, where you go through a value mining system, where you actually get to write down your personal values versus organizational values versus, you know, the community values and national values. There are different sets of values, I think, we need to focus on, because some are universal and some are relative somehow. And that's where sometimes we go wrong as people generally.
Brana, if you're done, I'd like to just ask Mr. Ruth Karimaya to just expound on what you said in terms of values, especially from a Rwandan context.
You see, as she said, a leader is a human being, like anyone. He is a citizen, like anyone. He gets values, fundamental values that we get from our homes, from the school, from our society. Then he's a human being. He's a citizen. But when he becomes a leader, of course, and he's there in public, because by the way, we are all leaders. You can lead your home. A mother in a home, she's a leader. A student, when in a class, sometimes they give a leadership. But here we are talking of the leaders, public leaders who go out and organize the society and do so many things and give an example and so on. Of course, the values have to work. But again, judging him, you should know that he's a human being. He's a citizen like you. And he can commit some blunders. That you have to know it, that they aren't perfect. And it's why they are asked to have the value of humility. When he does it, he comes back and asks for pardon. We were talking of the last time's incident. I don't think that it is the worst incident that we are having.
Like Chelsea.
No, it isn't.
Not by far, yeah.
No, but the problem is that he did it in a public, where he has to give an example. That's it. You see, of course, when a leader has to give an example, and you have to give an example to people you are leading. Now, if you start not giving example to people who are leading, it becomes public. Then it is worse than perhaps a leader who stole money and whom we never, undercover, they will never know him. You will know him later on when he has stolen a lot of money. Well, the values, of course, some values, it becomes quick, known, the media is there, and he did it to people he should be giving, to whom he should be giving a good example. He was in fact, he wasn't punished. He resigned because he didn't give a good example. That's why. Now, those values, we get them from our homes, we get them from the schools in which we are, we get them from the society in which we are living. And I think she is the one who asked how do they choose leaders? You see, there is one way, a way that we were using in the RPF. I tell it to you and you will analyze how it was, the way that we can go on using it today. We are always having a pool of cadres, making us work. Later on, one comes out. We're giving them some responsibilities. Later on, you find someone who's more responsible than others. He comes out. That's how we're using them. Having a very big pool of cadres, and you go on choosing. This time it is the same. Also because we are in a society which is now has got many problems, many directions, and so on. You get young people who had been perhaps leaders somehow, because when they are choosing this, was he reading in something in the university? Was he doing this?
Like previous leadership roles.
Previous leadership and so on, asking themselves. But usually the leadership, you learn it at work. Because whether you have the theory, when you come in practice, things change. You learn it from theory, you know how to debate with others, how to take decision, how to try and explain others what you want. Because you can have good ideas, and you don't have facility of giving out the ideas and explaining what you want. Well, that is something which you have to have, you have to learn. You learn it slowly by slowly, you learn it with other people, and so on. Really, when you see that there are some of the young leaders who come, usually they bring them knowing that their curriculum is good, but now they put them in practice, to work in action, where they want to go on educating them. If the minister in a cabinet, if the minister in his ministry, and so on. Because you go on learning, and by doing things.
But if I can ask you a quick question, also to echo what Charles said, and we're going to, I'll get to you, Mehe. Is there, you're here as someone who's extensively been participant in forming Rwanda's leadership frameworks, and you're also an elder, well, part of the Advisory Council for Elders of Rwanda. Is there sort of, I don't know how to say, academy? Is there a school? Is there sort of, they learn, yes, they learn on the job, but is there, I don't know, I think I'm asking what I want.
Do they go through a crash
is there a crash course?
program?
These leaders we have, these young leaders, how, is there something that's...
It depends upon if you become a minister, of course, they have...
For instance, are ministers trained before they become ministers?
Usually a minister, when he comes, he or she really have passed through other ministers, people had been, the president, and he using his organs of the state. He knows it, this one, can do this. That's one. But the second, a society is a society. You can have even an individual. You bring him because you don't want him to stay there and do havoc. You bring him near you in order to control him. Because if you leave him out, and you try to control him, you try to educate him and so on to make him live with others. There are sometimes those things that we choose in that way. As I was saying, of course, you have. If you are choosing, you are having 40 men and 60 men, and you want women to come in, and there you go and look for those women. Sometimes you want to be successful when you are choosing men, because men were many. The pool of men were many. While the pool of women, this time they are many, but before they were very few. Then you have to choose and so on, and because there are other considerations, the constitutional considerations of having 30% of women, and so on. There are so many things. You have got political parties. You know that as our politics is. We always do on a principle of power sharing, yes, in order to get to look for dialogue and consensus. Then there you have to look, even if you are having, let's say you are a president of RPF, having thousands of cadres, while other parties are hundreds of others, you have to go to hundreds of, and try to get one, and he comes in. Because we are having another objective. There is a principle that you have to fulfill. That one of power sharing, that one of building a dialogue and a consensus, which will build our unity as a country.
I agree. And what I'm getting from this is that, not answering the question directly, there's no place where people physically go and come back, and
better leaders.
It should be. But basically, certain elements of our society shape and condition these people to do the best they can. And I mean, same question to you. Our leadership bracket is characterized by young people.
Yes.
Whether it's private sector, whether it's civil society, whether it's government. But a lot, with these leadership positions, usually for people to have sort of smooth sailing, there's experience, there's wisdom. or mentorship. And I feel like mentorship is lacking.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like Charles said, it costs them their jobs.
Yeah.
You know, young CEOs who are appointed, and you know, less than a year later, you don't see the gentleman or lady. So, from your perspective as a Cora CEO, what initiatives exist in Rwanda? Because I think we are looking for practical,
Homegrown
tangible
solutions.
examples of how, within our Rwandan context, how do we onboard, how do we train these leaders for their positions?
Yes. Thank you, Dan. I think I echo what Charles just said, homegrown solutions. So we are very much into made in Rwanda products, physical products, as in, you know, our beloved coffee. But I think in line with your question, we should certainly start investing into made in Rwanda coaches, trainers in the intellectual capacity, because as a nation, we're heading towards becoming, or we are already a knowledge-based economy. So knowledge comes with the training, comes with coaching, mentoring, etc. So I certainly agree with the assessment that we are seeing more young CEOs rising up. So the millennial generation is what we are referring to now. And there should be system, whether it is in the private sector or the public sector. But let's go first to the public sector, where I think
Because in public, as
yes, absolutely, and they are up for scrutiny a lot. So in terms of organization, when we are appointing leaders, we should make provision for a space for them to have onboarding, mandatory onboarding processes, whether it is to speak to the media, to talk about issues of media etiquette, how to address interviews or respond to journalists, or even to undergo that emotional intelligence of a leader. Those are absolutely crucial, mandatory programs we should have in the first month to 3 months of a leader's position, be it, you know, minister or PS or, you know, the whole civil society. So I think as a country, we will do ourselves a service to make sure that we build upon the fantastic brand that we have as a nation, to employ women, to employ the youth in our high-ranking positions, by investing into ensuring that they do not fail after a month, as you say, because it costs. It costs a lot in terms of reputation, in terms of brand of the nation, speaking of brand Rwanda. So I think that's my point of view in terms of the public sector. What we should do, we should certainly ensure that there are some systematic onboarding processes and plans that are not only on paper. I'm sure we have it somewhere written.
Some sort of orientation, but that's not enough.
Yes, it's not. It has to be practical, and we talked about accountability. So somehow, somewhere in every organization, there should be someone who ensures that that person has underwent that particular onboarding. If you are a minister, do you know how to speak to journalists? Do you know how to dress as a woman, as an ambassador? What can you do to represent our country, our nation well, internally and internationally as well? So that's for the public sector. Also for the private sector, I think we're also seeing a rise of entrepreneurs doing pretty well. They're coming up with a lot of ICT, manufacturing, innovations, etc. And maybe some have been put in position because the talent is valued, as you said, but they should also be equipped to do that. Your question earlier was with regards to the initiatives that are around in Rwanda. So since
we're hoping for good news to see what
there
is actually happening on the
fantastic
ground,
news, my dear.
from theory to practical.
I came with good news.
Okay.
So the good news is that the reason why we exist as a coaching academy, so there was never a coaching academy in Rwanda. So we saw that there was a need for us to create a pool of homegrown, made in Rwanda leadership coaches that can serve Rwanda and not rely on importing international leadership coaches from Kenya, South Africa, USA, I believe also. So the academy is there to ensure that we have sufficient pool of that. So the initiatives that we have created in the last year or so is an initiative in partnership with the Breakfast Club Africa. It's a CEO and MD's exclusive organization that focuses on enhancing actively leadership, not only randomly, but systematically. So we have initiatives where we encourage leaders to gather in groups, learn from each other, where you would have up to 10 CEOs, not max. It's not like a major conference, but on a monthly basis, we gather MDs, CEOs in the corporate environment to discuss issues, just on a round table like this one. Like you would say, Charles, in my company, I've faced issues on performance management. I don't think that we do very well. So I could give you advice based on what I believe I have seen. So vice versa. Or
so
you could
they mentor each other or
exactly.
an exchange experiences.
Yes, so exchange of experiences, and also through our coaches that we have graduated who are experts in the field, that we will have one-on-one. So for example, if Charles needed a leadership coaching session because he needs more confidentiality or more space for him to really open up to someone who's an expert. So we facilitate that. So as I guess a place for leaders to talk about individual issues, they need to speak to someone who's an expert in human behaviors, in business management, and also challenging leaders. Because CEOs are not usually challenged. The top man, the top woman doesn't hear a no every day. So you need someone who is bold enough to say, hey, Diane, I don't think you made the right decision in your company. Have you looked at this? And the coach is there to facilitate that space. So those are some of the quick wins that we've managed to gather
through coaching and business academy.
Correct, yes.
Okay. But just, if you can just answer very quickly, I think also you didn't mention what exists in the public sector.
Right.
And you said, like, Mr. Rutaremara said, they come under scrutiny. These are leaders that, we serve the Rwandan citizens. I don't know if anything is happening so far. Maybe Charles and Vanna can weigh in. But in your opinion, what do you think should be done? The same thing?
We should do a lot more. I think we should be more targeted towards young leaders. There should be more structured mentoring programs geared towards the top people for organizations. That is crucial. Think about who we are as individuals. So if you look at your head, like your physical head, if your head is looking this way and your body, it will follow this way, but you're supposed to go that way. So the head of the organization is the CEO, is the minister, etc., needs to be addressed. So I think we certainly need to focus on creating not just another program for the sake of ticking off the box, but really structured mentoring programs for leaders, both in the private sector and public sector. They shouldn't really be the silos. Both need each other. If I need, to change the address of our organization, which is housed at Charles's, and at this stage, I will need to go and speak to someone Kumurenge. Right? So there is a leader at Kumurenge. There's got to be communication somehow. And I think we should integrate those two together, not look at them into two separate silos, because we both need each other. Yeah, so there should be some of those.
Charles?
I mean, Mireya said something that has tickled me on two different fronts. Number one is I do not feel that we are very, very deliberate in addressing our challenges. And she said something around, have we been very frank with ourselves that we actually have leadership gaps, whether it is in the private or public sector? When we wake up in the morning and there is a high turnover in the sporting circles, whether it is at ministerial level, at PS level, at heads of sporting federations, and we want to be a huge sporting destinations, do we take a step back and ask ourselves, why are the leaders of these organizations getting it wrong? When we wake up in the morning and the Auditor General's report is faulting us on governance gaps, year in, year out, do we actually take a step back in the leadership regime? Muzaitito, I guess, amongst all of us, with the exception of Bana, who goes for the opening ceremony and leaves. Do we actually?
Know that she doesn't stay there.
She's usually
behind the windows and the doors.
Are we extremely deliberate on saying that this guy, does she or he know how to conduct herself? Yeah. You just talk about dressing.
Yeah.
You'll appoint Diana tomorrow to become the PS of a certain ministry, X. She goes into that position when her previous tailor is somebody who was very mean with material. Fast forward, she gets into the position and the receptionist thinks she's naked. She was like, no.
It's a good thing we have Uzi.
Yes. No, just giving examples.
Yeah.
Or somebody comes from somewhere because he has been an extremely good mobilizer. Mzee Tito was talking about mobilizing and bringing people together. The guy has been an extremely good mobilizer out there in diaspora. You bring him, and then you make him head of a certain institution. I'm going to give an example for just practical purposes. School of Art. And the guy is required to lead an institution. But the guy is used to wearing shorts and sandals and sleeveless T-shirts and walking while eating.
Yeah.
Wherever he's coming from, that's all right, as long as he's delivering on his job. But has he been cautiously prepared to know that that is not within us? And we can give quite a number of examples and so on and so forth. And that's where my biggest concern is really on how we have prepared this, our people to be leaders in our own context. Or we take it for granted that by virtue of the fact, and I'm extremely concerned, Mzee Tito, with all due respect, that we expect people to learn from the job. Oh no, these people will fall down like rocks.
That's what they call baptism by fire.
Baptism by they'll fall down like rocks. But I want to talk about something else really around homegrown solutions. And I'm glad, Mireille, you brought this up, because I don't believe that we are short of resource.
Agreed.
We have a huge crop of young people who have grown through the ranks to become CEOs and captains of industry, whether in the private or public sector. But these guys still need that leadership. They still need that mentorship. They still need that guidance.
Yeah.
While you have very seasoned people who have gone into retirement, semi-retirement, forced retirement, or retirement out of age, who can still add value. Yeah. And I have said this before on the square, I will say it again, especially in the military. Because the army trains you extremely well. I don't know any institution that trains better than the army. From the time you're doing a non-commissioned officer course to a officer cadet course, all the way through all the programs that they have for senior commanders and all the programs, they come out extremely good products. And then they go into leadership, they become senior officers, they retire. Some of them eventually become very successful businessmen, but the society loses them somewhere.
But I like just to give some...
And can you imagine some of these very seasoned retired officers, if they were taken to become board members or board chairs of some of these institutions where people are getting it wrong? Can you imagine Mzee Tito tomorrow retires and he is not anywhere to guide a young banner who is leading a parastatal? You will have missed that sachets.
It's a wealth of wisdom that we definitely have to keep.
Yes. You know, the interesting thing with Charles around initiatives, for some reason he thinks the army is the template. But we all can't be, you know, some of us are civilians and we need civilian solutions. But I just wanted to point out that, at least from my experience, I had a team, and I also didn't have any coaching, you know, probably.
It was baptism by fire.
Yeah. And what you confront most of the time, I mean, if I may use my own personal experience,
please.
From just being a journalist, your job is to interview people, write stories, and that's it. Then you're given a management position where you have to manage people. Managing people is a whole complex system. That is one. Two, there are these responsibilities around, for instance, if you have auditors around, what you do, declare all sorts of, you know. So I'm imagining in the public sector having to deal with that. Then you have office politics. So for a young person, really, and back to his earlier point that, you know, you learn on the job, I think if we could be more forgiving as a society, and when a young person makes a mistake, we see that this is someone without experience, and probably they needed that time to learn on the job.
So allow them to make mistakes.
Yes, allow them to make mistakes, because there are always two options, I think. You're given a position and you completely do nothing and just try to save your head, or you try to experiment and, carry out some risks. So if people try to experiment or risk, and then they always face the, the axe,
Yes.
then you can be sure that those who are watching, the next time they're appointed, will just sit and say,
That's true.
okay,
That is very
I
true.
have to watch my back, So I don't know, the professional coach could speak to that.
So in human resources in HR, there is certainly something called disciplinary measures or warnings. So depending on the organization, there should be a system for employees to be able to fail, if there is such a thing as failing, once, twice, or 3 times, depending on the organization. So in terms of empathy and forgiveness, there should be a system where there is disciplinary cautions or measures being put in place in terms of, helping the person improve. But then again, there are mistakes and mistakes. If there is a mistake of embezzlement or anything that has to do with financial fraud,
That's true.
that is a very difficult one to put on a warning or a discipline or tax evasion. That I think companies will need to set up the policies around the human resources that address those. But in terms of capacity building, certainly as organizations, public or private, we should create a safe space for the young blood or the young generation to learn from the experienced leaders through structured mentoring programs, something that is definitely structured, so that we know if we have leaders like Mzee Tito, who is exiting or sunsetting, that the ones who are rising like the sun should definitely meet somehow, somewhere, so that we don't lose the incredible experience that they have. So that, I believe, should be a good starting point.
You know what I look forward to? Just very quickly, before I go to Twitter, but I'll get back to you, Brenna, very quickly. What I look for, listening to you, Brenna, to Mzee Tito, to you, Mireille, and Charles, is that, I'm also someone who, runs a business, and one of the things that I find lacking, especially in terms of young professionals in the private sector, but I think also now in the public sector, is a sort of mentorship. There's very little, if at all, any sort of structured mentorship. An institution where I say I'm signing up, I want to mentor for 1 year to shadow. They don't exist. I can't even think about younger people than me, maybe who are just, starting off from universities. What I'm hoping is that in the next, 5 years, there's sort of initiatives that are tangible and cemented.
To get them.
In addition to Cora, I hope many others mushroom. But also in civil society, there's a wake up in terms of how we are onboarding or how we can onboard our young leaders, our new ministers, our new permanent secretaries, our new ambassadors.
Drop it down. Drop it down even at the level of
a director.
Mudugudu.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, executive.
So there has to be proper handover also. So, the topic is broad. In developed economies, that structure is given. So you come into an organization, whether you are in Europe or in America, there is such a system as part of human resources or talent management. So you can even go as far as spotting high potential talent, and then you grow them. So there's so many benefits for organizations, such as retention. So it will reduce the turnover of the organization and create more loyalty. If I have a leader that really invests in me in terms of training, in terms of giving me exposure and visibility, I will be likely to remain in that organization and serve. Speaking to serving rather than going to the competitor or the next organization. So I think in terms of loyalty and longevity, certainly structured mentoring will definitely help.
It's very necessary. Brenna, very quickly before we go to the Twitter
I also wanted to highlight the issue of processes. I mean, when someone is appointed, you would assume that in every institution there are processes and systems. So sometimes these people are appointed and there are no systems, there are no processes, there's nothing to refer to. And that complicates everything because you're literally swimming with your eyes closed, So I feel that part of the solution lies in ensuring that institutions have functioning policies and systems, so that if you
enable
SMEs, and they are growing up, right? With the youth, there's more SMEs coming up.
Yes.
Well, I think the young people have been talking and talking. You even forgot the old man who is there.
Not at all.
Let's talk. I start with what he said, that in the Yemen, people train and so on. You see, there are discipline, two types of discipline. There is the military discipline, where because they want you to get to the right thing at the right time. But there is another discipline, which is a revolutionary discipline. Because you are there, you want to work, you want to put things right. You don't need to have the military discipline. But in the military, of course, officers, these generals and so on, they have got both. They have got both revolutionary discipline and military discipline. Now, of course, you can bring them in the boards, whether you wanted them to come to the boards, but their work is to only think as a military defense of the country. They might not be knowing how to count money.
There are different specializations.
They have got their specialists.
I think that's a general statement.
But of course, they can come. There are some jobs which they do, ambassadors and so on, because they have got that revolutionary discipline where they have gone through training, they have gone through debate, they have gone through leading, because they learn how to lead. Yeah. Now, when we come to our positions, we talk as if everything is not okay. No, you see.
Everything is okay.
You see, you have the gap. There are gaps, of course. Yes. In a society, you have your work is to go on filling in those gaps. That's what she's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, but you see, when people come, most of those who become ministers, or they were in the organizations, in the departments. They have been looking at them. They know how they are working and so on. They come from there. If they don't come from there, they come from political parties. They have been leaders of the trained and so on. Of course, when they come, there is an induction. In fact, there is induction, which they have, and there even it is in meetings which we have. We talked about it when we were in Gabiro. See where there are discussions and people talking, the president giving out the ideas, ministers and so on. We go on talking, like pointing out where things are not going well. In other departments, for instance, in the parliament, I remember when we were in the parliament, we had 2 weeks of induction. How did they vote laws? How they behave and so on. That's the thing that we were doing. So there is induction course which is there. Yes. Of course, it is not enough, but it is there. Absolutely. Usually because people come when they are already politicians. Now, the problem we are talking young people. You see, you should really be proud of your society, where you have got young people coming out to lead.
Yeah.
True. For sure.
All the people, we are there, please do this, please go slow. But they are very dynamic and so they want to be quick. No, you can't compare our society with other societies where you're having all ministers, the youngest is my age.
And also women, Muzeiti.
Yes, and also women. Women, of course, young women. You see, we are lucky to have it. Even if we commit some mistakes, but they have got time to learn. They have got time to change. Young people do change, and it's why, in fact, we are somehow doing a bit better than other people are having. Of course, we go on to induction. We've got the RIAM, which comes and gives some lessons. We've got the academy. I wish I had that academy when I was starting working in the RPF.
It's never too late to
I wish I had that academy.
But they're there, yes. I think unfortunately, we've come to the end of the show. We have not even had time to read our Twitter feed, unfortunately, but please keep the conversation going using the hashtag #TheSquareRW. I'd like to thank our guests immensely. It's a very broad topic, like you said. I think we need part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. So I'd like to thank you, Zetito. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation. Mireille, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
We look forward to a lot more of what Cora Coaching and Business Academy will do in the future, and we'd hope to have you on the show once again.
Thank you.
Yes,
We'll
Charles Heber, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Bernard, great to have you on the show as always. To our viewers who are watching, thank you for tuning in as always. I would like to thank our partners, Made in Rwanda, Uzi Collections for dressing us, and Bourbon Coffee for keeping us refreshed. Thank you, have a good night, and see you again next week.